Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Mike Salter with the Federal Acquisition Service, Office of Travel, Employee Relocation and Transportation. Hopefully, as you just heard, and as Liz announced earlier, we will be recording this session. I want to thank you all for taking the time to meet with us today. For those of you that did attend Tuesday's session, thanks for joining us again. And for those who did not, welcome. So as Liz noted, there is some general housekeeping for today. This workshop will be recorded and posted to the ETS Next Industry community page on Interact. Hopefully you registered when you registered to attend these sessions and also signed up to be notified when we do post additional information so that you're kept notified when we do so. This is a webinar, so all participants are on mute and there is no individual camera access. So to communicate, we ask that you please use the chat tool to report any technical difficulties and that you please use the question and answer functionality to ask questions. With that functionality, you can upvote a question if you have the same or a similar topic for discussion. Today's workshop will be approximately 2 hours. We'll be covering quite a bit of information. To let you know that the third workshop, which is scheduled for Tuesday, November 16th, the length of that will depend on the number of questions we get over the next few weeks, the number of FAQs that are developed, and of course, any questions that are asked during the open session. The session on Tuesday, November 16th will be an open Zoom meeting, so you will have access to your cameras and microphones, so it'll be a bit more of an open discussion. And then some additional information when we are going over the artifacts and the examples of the standards, depending on if you're viewing on a laptop or a different size screen, the content may be a little bit small. So here is how you can resize it so that you can see it better. If at the top of your screen, you select View option, you can then choose Zoom ratio fit to window, and then choose 100% original size. And then there will be a hand or a grab tool that will allow you to navigate the slide. Unfortunately, it is a lot of information, so some of the text is small. We do apologize, but once you do download the standard, you certainly will be able to view them at an appropriate size. For today, our session is on how to read the T&E Business Standards. So what we are going to do is first go over the Business Standards artifacts. And as Tom Miller from OGP referenced on Tuesday, we'll be looking at the service function activity lists, the use cases, the capabilities, and the standard data elements. And we'll also be going over 3 examples on how to read the documentation across the various artifacts. And the examples include making a reservation, the funds check and funds obligation on an authorization or a pre-trip approval, and a traveler with a family emergency. So the T&E Business Standards define the core service for travel and expense for the next generation of travel, or ETS Next. And that's comprised of 5 components: reservations, both online via an online booking tool or agent assisted from a travel agent at the travel management company; the authorization, also referred to as pre-trip approval; fulfillment or ticketing provided by the travel management company, including the automated quality control of the ticket; the voucher or expense report; and regulatory and standard travel and expense reporting. And throughout that process, we have financial management integration, including what we call the obligation process lifecycle. That process occurs throughout the life of a document, as changes to reservations or other items on the documents can cause a change necessary to the financial management system. So here we have our standard travel and expense workflow. This, of course, is the perfect example, so to speak. It does not deal with any deviations such as changes or cancellations. It includes 4 of the 5 components: reservations, authorizations or pre-trip approval, fulfillment by the travel management company, the financial management integration, and the voucher or expense report. Reporting is not included in this diagram. This is showing the end-to-end process for travel and expense itself. Obviously, the data that is completed at the end of the process would be fed into a reporting solution. And again, this flow includes the standard obligation process lifecycle. This process tends to be unique to the government, including the obligation of funds prior to travel, which is done on the authorization. In addition, also note that the expectation is that both booking data and the travel authorization data flow into the voucher itself. We'll just do a quick run through of the workflow. So the traveler would sign into their portal. The traveler would make their reservations either via the online booking tool or calling the travel agency and speaking to a travel agent. Once that is completed, that information is populated into the travel authorization. And at the same time, the passenger name record is created by the OBT or created by the travel agent in the GDS. Once that is complete, the document is submitted for approval to the supervisor. While that is occurring, a funds check is sent to the financial solution to make sure that there are funds available on the associated line of accounting. Of course, in this example, the funds are available and a response is sent back to the travel solution. That's often referred to as a positive acknowledgement with a shorthand of POSAC, for those of you that are familiar with civilian government travel. And in this case, the supervisor is going to approve the trip. And at that point, the traveler is notified of the completed travel authorization. And the documentation in the passenger name record is updated. A OK to ticket is sent to the passenger name record, allowing for a ticket to be ticketed within the ticketing time frame set up by an agency. Normally, that's 48 hours before travel, but there are some differences depending on the agency. And at that same time, an obligation is sent to the financial solution, creating the purchase order, which is the equivalent of an authorization in the financial solution. And an acknowledgement is sent back to the travel solution. And at that point, the final itinerary is confirmed, the approval is documented, and the travel authorization is marked as complete or put into a similar status, depending on how the agency defines a completed document. Obviously, the traveler travels and the tickets are issued in the appropriate time frame. So that authorization and ticketing information flow into the voucherings to the travel solution to create the voucher or expense report. The traveler would upload any receipts, whether that was done originally by optical character recognition, taking a picture with their mobile device, or uploading a PDF if they've scanned the document. They'll complete the voucher, updating the actual costs and submit for approval. That will also trigger a funds check and an acknowledgement back from the financial solution, again, saying that funds are available. Again, this is the perfect case, so to speak. The supervisor receives the notice of the voucher for approval. They are going to approve this trip because the traveler has done everything correctly. So at that point, the completed travel voucher is submitted to the financial system for payment or disbursement. So the payment or the invoice is created in the financial solution. Excuse me. An acknowledgement is sent back to the travel solution, and the travel document is marked as paid or complete, depending how the agency determines to define that. So just a quick review, the Travel and Expense Business Standards were developed using the Federal Integrated Business Framework, often referred to as the FIBIF, because in the government, we have to have an acronym for everything. And this shows the end-to-end process for the travel and expense life cycle, starting with the service functions activities list, the business capabilities, and the business capabilities are similar to business requirements in a standard software development lifecycle. The scenarios and business use cases, and these business use cases have been mapped to the financial management business use cases, which you'll see in one of our examples. The standard data elements, which have been mapped to the financial management standard data elements, and the service measures, previously called performance measures, Those are currently in a draft status and going through the approval process following the Federal Integrated Business Framework. And those will be posted sometime next year. So how to read the T&E Business Standards. So we're going to be walking through several examples of the business standards documentation, and all of the documentation is available at the website listed at ussm.gsa.gov/FIBIF-travel, as well as any of the other standards that have been developed by the other lines of business. So this will help you to understand how we expect travel and expense will work in the future for the civilian government. So first, we're going to review the service function activity to understand which of the 10 activity areas are a part of this use case. We'll review the use case itself and note the activity area, again, associated with the steps of the use case. Then review the capabilities that are associated with that particular activity area referenced in the use case. In the capabilities, you can review the inputs, the processes, and outputs associated with the use case to complete the necessary steps. And finally, we'll take a look at the standard data elements for the associated capabilities to see the minimum data necessary to complete the end-to-end process. This is not a technical data specification. In the Federal Integrated Business Framework, you define the minimum data necessary to complete the process. A technical specification would be developed further within the acquisition strategy. So again, just a reminder, we are going to go over the business standards documents, the service function activities for travel and expense, of which there are 10 activity areas. The use cases, which combines multiple scenarios into a story to explain how travel and expense will work for the civilian government. The capabilities, which show the inputs, processes, and outputs to complete those activities, and which will be the basis for the business requirements for ETS Next, or the next generation of travel and expense. And the standard data elements with the minimum data necessary to complete the entire end-to-end process. We will take a 10-minute break because there is a lot of information we'll be covering in that first part. And then we'll go over 3 examples: how to make a reservation, funds check and funds obligation on the authorization, and a traveler with a family emergency. So starting with the service function activities. So travel is in the service area TRT, which is short for travel, relocation, and transportation, with a service area name of Travel and Transportation Management. These are the other service areas that are supported by the Office of Shared Solution and Performance Improvements, or referred to as OSPI, that participate in the Federal Integrated Business Framework process and have developed or are developing standards using the process. As you can see, Federal Financial Management is also part of this, and we have worked closely with them to align our standards across the 2 services. So within the travel and expense service, there are 4 functions. However, today we are only focusing on travel and expense management, as standards for the other functions have not been developed as of this time. So as noted, travel and expense is then comprised of 10 activities. You can see 3 of them here on this page. We will focus on 1 for this particular discussion. So in this case, we are in travel, relocation, and transportation, which we are in functional area 10, activity 10, travel personnel profile setup and maintenance. And you can see in the service activity description a number of activities that can occur as part of this process. Tom referenced some of these on Tuesday, such as determine and document the approvers for a traveler, determine and document family member eligibility for travel, evaluate travel special needs requests and document accommodations, etc. On this page, you can see 2 of the other activity areas. 10.20, travel reservation assistance and processing, and 10.30, temporary duty, or TDY, and local travel authorization processing. You will see quite a bit of those two as we go through our examples, as we will be covering how to make a reservation and how the funds check and funds obligation occurs on the authorization. So the next artifact we'll be looking at is the use case. So this is the summary page of a business use case. Each case has a name. In this case, we are looking at level 1, number 1, domestic trip with a date change. Tom Miller also referenced this on Tuesday. We believe that this particular use case probably covers about 80 to 85% of travel for the civilian federal government. It is a domestic trip with a date change, as I'm sure some of you or a lot of you know. In the federal travel arena, people tend to change their trip several times before actually taking the trip. This is the end-to-end process that is associated with travel and expense from a financial management perspective. So we are part of the book to reimburse end-to-end business process within financial management. So this particular use case covers the following business scenarios. Level 1, number 1, domestic travel. Level 1, number 17, trip with a date change. And level 1, number 19, traveler with a travel card. And just as a reminder, as Tom referenced on Tuesday, a level 1 use case has both a high transactional volume and a high dollar value for travel. A level 2 use case has either a high transactional volume or a high dollar value. And obviously a level 3, it has a low transactional volume and a low dollar value. We'll be looking at both level 1 and level 2 use cases. At this point in time, the level 3 use cases have not been created, but they will be in the future. You have the business actors, or those that are participating in this particular use case. So in this example, we have the traveler, we have the approver or approvers, we have the travel management center, and we have the finance office, which is the term used for the group that manages the financial management solution. Then we have the synopsis. I think the term's a little misleading because it is kind of a high level, but also detailed synopsis of what is occurring in the use case. So this gives you quite a bit of information up front as to what is occurring, as you'll see when we get to the actual examples themselves. The assumptions and dependencies show you just that for this particular use case. For all of the use cases, the first 4 assumptions and dependencies are the same. Anything after the first 4 will then be unique depending on the particular use case. And then finally, the initiating event is what causes this use case to occur. And the assumption is always that the triggering event is occurring so that this use case is going to happen. So in this example, a government employee is requested to travel to a domestic location for mission support services. And we'll go into further detail on this when we do the actual example itself. So after the summary page, we have the first page of this particular use case. Again, we are looking at level 1, number 1, domestic trip with a date change. And this will show the typical flow of events or the events for this particular use case. So starting out, the first thing to point out is we are looking at the activity area, 10.20, travel reservation assistance and processing. And you'll see we'll go back to this multiple times throughout this discussion and throughout the examples. So the first column always shows the TRT event, or the travel and expense event that is occurring. I'm not going to walk through this in detail just yet, as we'll do that as part of the example for making a reservation. The second column shows the non-travel and expense related events. In this particular step in the process, there is not one, but we will see one when we look at the example for the funds check and obligation on an authorization. You will see the associated financial management use case and activities that are tied to that. The inputs show the information that is necessary to do the activities in the first column. And the output or outcomes, what occurs as part of that particular use case. And again, we'll go over that more in the example. So then the process continues. Again, just to point out, we are looking at 10.20, travel reservation assistance and processing. Here are the steps that will occur for travel and expense. Again, in this example, there is nothing in the non-travel and expense part. These are the particular inputs for this step. And just to point out, as you can see, the outputs or outcomes from step 1 are the first two inputs for step 2. So it follows kind of a cyclical pattern where the inputs become the outputs as we go through each step in the process, both in the use case as in the capabilities, as you'll see shortly. And then, of course, this is the output or outcome for the particular set of steps in number 2. So the capabilities. One way to think about the capabilities is they are similar to business requirements in a standard software development lifecycle. This might be the first document where the text is small. So if you need to make any adjustments to your screen and able to better view them, I'll give you a few moments before I go over the capabilities. Okay. Hopefully you were able to do so. If you have any questions on how to do so, please use the chat box. So the capabilities start with a similar process. They have the service function ID and name, in this case, TRT.10 for travel and expense management. You have the associated service activity area, in this case, 10.10 travel personnel profile setup and maintenance. And then we get to the capability ID itself. So in this portion of the capabilities, we have 10.10.11, which is part of the travel personnel profile setup and maintenance. This column shows you whether it is an input, a process, or an output, and it can only be one thing for this particular capability. You then have a capability statement, or what is occurring. So in this example, determine and document designated or delegated approvers for traveler as specified by the Federal Travel Regulation, or FTR. The next column shows you the authoritative reference or authoritative source. Authoritative sources are those laws, policy, regulation, OMB memos, etc., that drive the need for a capability within the travel and expense business standards. In the Federal Integrated Business Framework, where possible, capabilities are required to have an authoritative source. Of course, there may be capabilities that do not, especially those that are specific to the travel industry, because there are not law, policy, or regulation associated with them. And finally, we have the last column, which is other sources, which includes things that may be the basis for a particular capability. In this example, even though the text is cut off, what it is referring to is that this capability was also referenced from the statement of work for the ETS2 contract that was awarded. So some of the capabilities are referenced both in an authoritative source as well as referenced as existing capabilities that are in ETS2 today. So now taking a look at the standard data elements. This one's going to take a little bit of time, so please bear with me. The first we have is the service area lead. That is the service area that is the owner of this particular standard data element. And in this example, it happens to be the Office of Government-Wide Policy. As was discussed on Tuesday, the Office of Government-Wide Policy not only is responsible for the Federal Travel Regulation, Tom Miller and his team, they are also the standards leads and manage the standards for travel and expense. So this particular data element is in the service area for travel and expense. In this particular example, the data element label is travel personnel role name. The definition of that is the role or roles of a person with a responsibility to be executed during the travel process. There is a column for example values, and unfortunately the set that I chose does not have an example value in this case. The next column, as you can see, is the service activity reference. So this particular standard data element has quite an impact and use throughout the data standards. As you can see, it is in multiple service activities. including 10.10 travel personnel profile setup and maintenance, 10.20 travel reservation assistance and processing, and so on. In fact, I believe it looks like it's used in all but one of the activity areas. Next, you can see the business capability reference. So you can see the number of capabilities that this particular data element is associated with. In this example, you are not seeing all of the capabilities associated, but you can have a general idea that it is associated with quite a few. We have those in the 10.10 activity area. We have those in the 10.20 travel reservation assistance and processing, and 10.30 TDY and local travel authorization processing. We have the authoritative source or sources for the particular standard data element, in this case, the Federal Travel Regulation and the Department of State Foreign Affairs Manual, or FAM. And in the standard data element workbook, there is also a data group name, so you can see which groups the data element is associated with. And when you do download the spreadsheets from the USSM website, you can sort by those data group names as you're taking a look at the standard data elements. So continuing the way this is laid out, as we previously just looked at the data group name, just to give you a point of reference, so this spreadsheet continues. We then have 5 technical information columns: data type, element format, minimum length, maximum length, and required or optional. These values are not filled out as part of the standard data elements. These would be determined as part of the technical solution that is decided for the next generation of travel and expense, and can be filled in once that has been determined. We also have assigned domain values for certain standard data elements. In this case, we have a number of roles defined. So we have authorizing official, senior authorizing official, fund certifying officer, sponsoring official, etc. And this is one of the things that we talked about with the travel and expense business standards will help with the government-wide reporting, because there will be standard domain values or values for those standard data elements as part of the next generation of travel and expense. There are validations that cross-reference across the documents within the business standards. These 2 columns, which are not filled in this particular data element, are related element reference and other relevant organizational information. I apologize, the 1 column cut off slightly. So if there were related elements tied to this particular standard data element, or there were other information associated with it, it would be included at this point. And in these final 2 columns, we have MITRE recommendations and additional sources. So MITRE helped develop the Federal Integrated Business Framework and assisted the Federal Acquisition Service with the initial development of the baseline standards prior to the standards lead's role moving to the Office of Government-Wide Policy. So for certain standard data elements, they did make some recommendations. And then finally, we have the additional sources. And as we noted, these are sources that fall outside the scope of law, policy, or regulation. And again, for this particular example, we have a reference to attachment 14, the service standard data elements appendix for ETS2, and standard form 326, the US federal government standard form for the semi-annual report of payments accepted from a non-federal source. So in summary, we've taken a look at the business standards artifacts or documentation that is available at the USSM website at the address noted here, ussm.gsa.gov/FIBIF-travel. We've taken a look at the service, function, and activities for travel and expense, and note that there are 10 activity areas, although we did not look at all 10 of them today. The use cases, which combine scenarios into a story, how to explain how travel and expense will work. The capabilities, which show the input processes and outputs for the solution and will be the basis for the business requirements for ETS Next. The standard data elements that define the minimum data necessary to complete the end-to-end process. And on another note, as the working group developed the initial set of baseline standards, and with the work done with Tom Miller and his team in the Travel and Expense Management Standards Committee, the follow recommendations were incorporated as part of the standards. Within the standard data elements workbook, we have standard values, as I mentioned, or domain values for things including trip purposes, expense types, and payment methods. We have common compliance or policy checks, and that includes both for the travel and expense solution, but also compliance checks for the passenger name record for the automated quality control functions. Policy standardization, including a streamlined approval process with one but no more than 3 approvers in an approval chain, and increased utilization of lowest non-refundable airfare where appropriate. And in addition to that, we also have our standards for financial management integration, which is referred to as the obligation process lifecycle. So for standardized financial management integration, implementing a consistent funds obligation at the time of authorization, a common process for crossing the fiscal year trip expenses, the work to develop a unique traveler ID with human capital and financial management. That is still an ongoing process with both human capital and financial management. As I'm sure you can understand, coming up with a unique secondary ID for federal employees is quite challenging. In order to streamline the authorization process, simplify the generation of the authorization expense estimate by adding a standard amount instead of having to itemize the expenses, simplifying the accounting class designation on the authorization and voucher, and the work done with the financial management community to develop a standard for derivation of the sub-object class code, and a common approach to travel advances, moving advances out of the travel solution and using the card products available from the GSA SmartPay program. Standardized voucher processing, eliminating the need to amend the authorization at the time of voucher submission and treating a voucher similar to a purchase request. A standardized process for payment of centrally billed accounts, and a standardized process for additional trip expenses after a voucher has been paid. So in reviewing the travel and expense business standards, you will see these items incorporated, although in some cases they are not called out explicitly, so we did want to make you aware of these recommendations that were incorporated. So I've been talking for about 40 minutes. I know that was quite a bit of information. At this point, we are going to take a 10-minute break to give you all a chance to digest what was said before we go into the examples. So we will talk to you, Liz, at 1:48.
Sounds good to me. 1:48.
Thank you. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can use the question and answer function. And again, if you have any technical issues, you can use the chat function. I'll be on mute, but will be available.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, I am 1:47, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So for our first example, we'll be take a look at making a reservation. This is part of a level 1 use case. Again, a level 1 use case has both a high travel volume impact as well as a high dollar value. So first, we will take a look at the service function activity area associated with making a reservation. I want to point up in the left-hand portion of the screen that we do have 3 color codes as part of this presentation. The dark blue-ish color shows a FIDF activity or capability numbering. The red shows a person or solution action, and the orange, yellow, gold color shows either an input or an output. And you'll see that throughout these examples. So first, we have the service activity ID of TRT.10.20. So that's travel and expense management. Activity 20, which is travel reservation assistance in processing. So within this service activity, we're going to take a look at the following. Identify and select government negotiated and non-government negotiated transportation provider, lodging, and rental car options. So in essence, we will be looking for flights available from the City Pair program, lodging in the Fed Rooms program, and rental cars available from the Department of Defense's car rental agreement. So looking at the associated use case for making a reservation, again, we are with our very popular use case, level 1, number 1, domestic trip with a date change. And just a reminder that this use case covers the following scenarios: domestic travel, trip with a date change, and a traveler who has a government travel card. So within the synopsis, we're going to be looking at these following activities. The travel dates and the travel location are identified for a domestic temporary duty TDY trip. The itinerary options are searched and reservations are made using a government travel card and the government-wide travel programs. For example, the City Pair program, and the reservation information is checked for compliance with no issues identified. And what checked for compliance with no issues identified in the nomenclature of the Federal Integrated Business Framework means that all policy and system checks were done and there were no issues that were identified. So again, we are taking a look at use case level 1, number 1, domestic trip with a date change. And as you can see, we are still within the service function activity area, travel reservation assistance and processing. We have the necessary inputs for this, so that includes the travel personnel profile information, trip date, location, and the trip purpose information, transportation, lodging, and rental car search information, meaning we want to take a look at the government programs, the government-wide and approved agency-specific travel policies, and the availability of the government-wide travel programs. So the first event for travel and expense is to identify trip dates, official station or residence location, the TDY location, and the trip purpose. Document the demographic information and preferences from the travel personnel profile. In this case, document means that it takes a look at the information that is available in the travel solution, or if information was available elsewhere. And we are going to begin to search for information on the available transportation, lodging, and rental car options. So what the outcome of that is the available government negotiated and non-government negotiated transportation provider schedule and fare, lodging and rental car option and pricing are provided, and the per diem rates for lodging are calculated. So for the next set, and we are still within the 10.20 travel reservations assistant and processing. The inputs include the available government and negotiated and non-negotiated government transportation provider schedules and fares, and the lodging and rental car options and pricing, per diem rates for lodging, the appropriate travel policies and associated compliance or policy checks, and the passenger name record documentary guidelines. So we then receive the available government negotiated and non-government negotiated transportation provider schedule and fare, lodging and rental car options and pricing. So what that means is in this first step, we have entered the necessary information. For this particular example and discussion, we'll talk as if we are using an online booking tool. So the traveler or travel arranger enters the information. It is put into the solution does the necessary search for that information and brings it back. And in step 2, by saying receive the information, that information is then presented to the traveler or travel arranger. So the traveler selects the appropriate transportation provider. So in this example, they're using the city pair fare, a Fed Rooms hotel, and a rental car under the Defense Travel Management car rental agreement. The solution will evaluate the reservation information for completeness, errors, and compliance with the passenger name record documentary guidelines and policy, and record the results with no issues identified. Again, meaning that there were no issues found with that reservation information. Using that information, it will establish and provide a validated reservation and PNR information with the appropriate ticketing date. And it will provide the traveler with the reservation information, in essence, providing the traveler with the itinerary information. So the outcome of that process is the validated reservation has been made and the passenger name record is updated and completed in the global distribution system, and the traveler has received their itinerary for their trip that they are going to take. So now we're going to take a look at the capabilities, the individual capabilities associated with this process. So again, all these capabilities are within the 10.20 Travel Reservation Assistance and Processing activity area. We're going to look at the first three capabilities, 10.20.11, 12, and 13. And for this example, the reason that we're looking at them together is all three are inputs to this process. So the first one, 10.20.11, is to capture the traveler or travel arranger request for reservation assistance consistent with the FTR, meaning that it is in alignment with policy. And there is also the appropriate authoritative reference or authoritative source. Capture the necessary traveler official station or residence location, their TDY or local travel locations, departure and return date, and have that information again consistent with the federal travel regulation, And finally, capture the government and non-government traveler search information, transportation, lodging, rental car, consistent with both the FTR and consistent with the Foreign Affairs Manual. So there are three inputs necessary then to complete this process for making a reservation. So then we get to capability 20.14. And at this point, that information is processed. And so the solution identifies, or the travel management agent identifies the available and lower price government negotiated and non-government negotiated options for transportation, air or rail, the route schedule and the fares, including US flag carrier, coach class, restricted, non-restricted, contract, non-contract, etc. Lodging and the rental car type. For example, the compact car is required by the federal travel regulation, and document the results consistent with the FTR and the FAM. Again, that means the system is processing the information and has that information to be available to provide to the traveler or travel preparer. And finally, the last capability in this example is 10.20.15, which itself is the output of that information, meaning to provide the available government negotiated transportation information, schedule and fares, the lodging information, and the rental car information consistent with the FTR and the FAM. So again, taking a look at this from the perspective, if you were booking an online reservation, you would gather the necessary information that you would like to use for making your trip. You would input that information into the solution or provide that information to the travel agent if you were making a reservation over the phone. The solution or the travel agent would process the necessary information, and the information would either be displayed online in an online booking tool, or the travel agent would provide them with the information and options available for them to choose from. And last but not least, the standard data elements. So again, we are within the 10.20 Travel Reservation Assistance and Processing area. We are looking at the capabilities 10.20.11, which was on the previous page in the capabilities, and it's also associated with 10.20.91, which was not part of this particular example. So this particular data element is the travel reservation assistance request text. So this would be information that would be contained in a request for travel reservation assistance. So for this particular data element, the assumption is that there is some sort of field within the online booking tool in case the traveler needs to request assistance from a travel agent once the information is submitted via the online booking tool. So that completes our first example, making a reservation. I'm now going to go on to our second example, the funds check and obligation of expense estimate on the authorization. Again, this is also part of a level 1 use case. Just a reminder, when we were viewing the travel and expense business standards artifacts, we did take a look at the workflow. So what we are focusing on specifically in this example is both the funds check and the obligation or the creation of the purchase order in a financial solution, which in most cases tends to be unique to the government, although we do know that some commercial entities do use encumbrance of funds, but that is very limited. So we are now in a different service activity area, 10.30, and that is part of TDY and local travel authorization processing. So in this case, we are going to determine funds availability for travel authorization or an amended travel authorization, and provide and confirm funds obligation information for a travel authorization or an amended travel authorization. Excuse me. So taking a look at our popular use case, level 1, number 1, domestic trip with a date change. We are taking a look at the same scenarios, domestic travel, trip with a date change, and a traveler with a travel card. However, in the synopsis, what we are looking at in the process is that the travel authorization is submitted, routed, reviewed, and approved by the appropriate parties. The funds check and the obligation occur as part of this process, but they are not explicitly called out in the synopsis of the use case, but you will see them identified in the actions that occur as part of the use case. So again, we are in 10.30 TDY and local travel authorization processing. So in this case, we are we have received the necessary inputs. So we have received the submitted travel authorization. The approver is going to evaluate the travel authorization information to verify travel is necessary or mission essential, compliant with applicable regulations and policies, including any documentation requirements, that they've identified the appropriate budget resources or line of accounting, and they record the results with no issues identified, again, meaning that it has passed any policy checks. So while that is occurring, the request for funds availability check for the obligation occurs. So the outcome as part of that process is that request for funds availability check for obligation is generated. We now have our first non-TRT event. So this is part of the Federal Financial Management use case 10.20, activity area 10.20, funds allocation and control. In the lower left-hand corner, you can see the website address for the Financial Management Standards. And again, all of these standards are available on ussm.gsa.gov. And the particular financial documents are available at /FIBIF-FM. So the financial solution receives and processes the request for funds availability check for obligation, processes the necessary information, and provides the response of the funds availability check back to the travel solution. So of course, in this example, funds are available for the travel to occur, and the appropriate response is sent back to the travel and expense solution. So we now head back to the travel and expense activities, again, 10.30 TDY and local authorization processing. The solution receives the funds availability response. The approver approves and or signs the travel authorization. The traveler is notified of the approval, and a request for funds obligation is generated for that particular travel authorization. So the outcome of this particular event is the approved travel authorization. The traveler is notified of the approval and the funds obligation request for travel is generated. So we now go on to step 7, with the previous step being step 6. And again, we are now in a non-travel and expense event. And in this particular case, we are looking at activity area financial management 30.20 obligation management. So the financial management solution receives the fund obligation request for this travel authorization. It obligates the funds for this particular document and provides back the confirmation of the obligation having been created. The outcome of that activity is the appropriate general ledger entries are created in the financial solution with reference to the source information. In most cases, that is usually the travel authorization number. That's a unique identifier for that particular trip. That information, again, is sent back to the travel expense solution. So we're back to the travel and expense activity for TDY and local travel authorization processing. The solution receives the funds obligation confirmation. The travel authorization document is updated with that confirmation information, and the output being the updated or completed travel authorization with the necessary obligation information. And the document is normally marked in some sort of complete or finished status, depending on the agency. So now we're going to take a look at the capabilities. Obviously, a lot is occurring here to make that all happen. So to simplify the process, we're going to take a look at a subset of the information. Again, we are within the 10.30 temporary duty and local travel authorization activity area. First, we are going to take a look at 10.30.214, which is the output of the approving official providing the travel authorization approval consistent with the FTR and FAM. We are now going to make a jump to the next capability. That capability is 221, and this was to make this example a little bit easier to follow. We've cut out some of the steps in between these. So we have the process, which is determine and document the funds obligation information for travel authorization consistent with 31 USC. We have 10.30.222, which is the output, provide funds obligation information for travel authorization consistent with 31 USC. So that means the travel and expense solution has determined the amount to be obligated, and that information is sent to the financial solution for processing. So in essence, it sends the information out, and the non-travel and expense event occurs in the financial management solution and the appropriate use case. Which then sends back that information. So we now go to capability 10.30.231, which is an input. So the travel and expense solution receives that funds obligation confirmation, again, consistent with 31 USC. Capability 232, that information is processed and the travel authorization document is updated with the necessary information. And finally, in 10.30.233, we have the output or the completed travel authorization that has the necessary obligation confirmation, and the travel authorization is complete. And then taking a look at some of the standard data elements associated with this process. Again, we are in 10.30. We're looking at business capabilities 10.30.222, which was on the previous page as part of the example, but also includes 10.30.332, which was not part of this particular example today. The data element is the travel authorization funds obligation text. And that's the information generated by the travel and expense solution to determine the funds obligation amount used for the travel authorization, and that is sent to the financial solution. And then in capability 10.30.231, which was in the previous example, but also in 10.3341, which was not, we have the travel authorization funds obligation confirmation text. So this is the information received back from the financial solution showing that the obligation and general ledger entries have been created in the financial solution. So the funds obligation confirmation information used for this particular travel authorization. I'm going to stop here for a moment and see if there are any questions related to the funds check and the obligation process. Since we know this tends to be unique to the government and not everybody on the call today may be familiar with it, we wanted to provide an opportunity now, before we do the final example, to provide an opportunity for you all to ask questions. Again, if you do have questions, if you can use the question and answer function.
We know this is a lot of information, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions at our third session on November 16th. So thank you. I know this is a lot to take in.
Okay, I don't see any questions just yet, so I'll go ahead and continue, but certainly please feel free to ask your questions, and we'll also provide an opportunity at the end of the session as well to ask questions. So for our final example, we are taking a look at travel that involves a family emergency. This is a level 2 use case, and just as a reminder, a level 2 use case either has a large travel volume or a high dollar value impact. So we are looking again at a different activity area, 10.50, Traveler Emergency Assistance Request Processing. And the particular activity we're going to look at is evaluate traveler emergency notification information and provide instructions. So we are now looking at a different use case. We are looking at level 2, number 4, remote foreign travel with a family emergency. There are 4 scenarios covered in this particular use case: travel to a remote location, unexpected travel, traveler family emergency, and foreign travel where a travel card cannot be used. Now, I know that's kind of a lot of disparate scenarios. When creating use cases in the Federal Integrated Business Framework, you take the scenarios for that particular level, in this case, level 2, and you combine them to make a use case. Some cases, they're not always the most likely to occur or have all of the scenarios occur at once. It's just the way that this particular use case was developed. So we do realize the likelihood of all 4 of these things occurring at once is probably very, very small. So within the synopsis, we are going to take a look at that news is received while traveling concerning a family emergency. A notification of the traveler's family emergency is provided, and instructions are provided to allow the traveler to return to his or her official station earlier than expected. So taking a look at activity number 9, again, we are in 10.50, Traveler Emergency Assistance Request and Processing. We received the news of the traveler family emergency. So that could be either the traveler's supervisor, or it could be the traveler themselves. And they would then prepare and submit traveler family emergency notification, with the output being the notification of that information. Again, still in 10.50, Traveler Emergency Assistance Request Processing. Receive the traveler family emergency notification. We're going to go with the assumption in this case, most likely the approver has notified the traveler. They will evaluate that emergency notification information, make a decision or record the results, and provide the traveler instructions to return to their official station. The output being the traveler receiving the necessary instructions to return home to their official station. The output of that and the input for it would be then to make the necessary reservation information As you can see, 10.20, travel reservation assistance and processing, which we've already addressed, so I'm not going to go into further detail, but that would be the outcome of that step. So taking a look at the capabilities, again, we are in the 10.50 service activity area, travel or emergency. Starting with capability 10.50, number 11, we have the input, capture the traveler emergency notification and information. 10.50.12, process the information, evaluate the traveler emergency notification information, make a decision about what to notify the traveler. And 10.50.13, the output being provide those results to the traveler themselves and notify them to make the necessary arrangements to return home. And finally, the associated standard data elements. Again, we're taking a look at an activity within 10.50, traveler emergency assistance request processing. The particular capability is 10.50.11, which was on the previous page. The data element itself is traveler emergency notification text, and that is the notification sent by the traveler to an authorizing approving official of the emergency travel interrupting TBY travel. And then in capability 10.50.13, the travel emergency instructions text, the instructions supplied to a traveler in regards to the emergency travel, in this case, instructions for the traveler to return home, and they would then make the necessary reservation arrangements. So in summary, we've taken a look at the travel and expense business standards artifacts. That documentation, again, is available at ussm.gsa.gov, I apologize, /FBIF-travel. That includes the service function activities list, the use cases, the capabilities, and the standard data elements. And the examples we looked at today are making a reservation, the funds check and funds obligation on the authorization, and a traveler with a family emergency. So I will now open it for questions about the information provided in this session, either about the artifacts themselves or the examples that were provided. Okay. Well, if there are no questions about the information in this particular session, if there are any questions from Tuesday's session, the information provided by the Office of Government-Wide Policy, Tom Miller, or if you have any other questions about this information, please feel free to go ahead and do so. If not, our next session is on Tuesday, November 16th at 1 o'clock. You can submit questions about the business standards over the next 2 weeks. Once you've had an opportunity to download and start reviewing them, you can send those to etsnext@gsa.gov. And based upon the questions we receive, one will certainly answer those questions, but also developing any frequently asked questions depending on the topics. And when we do meet on the 16th, first we will review those frequently asked questions that were developed and have an open Q&A session. Again, that will be more like a standard Zoom meeting where everybody in attendance will be able to have their camera on and have their mics open so there can be a bit more of a back and forth dialogue. And I just wanted to say thank you for your attendance, but we will stay on for a bit to see if there are any additional questions. But if not, again, thank you for your time and attendance, both Tuesday and today. And we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, November 16th, and we are looking forward to hopefully getting some questions from you over the next 2 weeks. We know it's a lot of information to digest. Hopefully this will help as you do read the travel and expense business standards and have an idea of how the various artifacts work together to define what the standards are and will be for the next generation of travel and expense.
Thanks so much, Michael. Just a reminder that these sessions are recorded and they'll be posted on Interact. They do have to go through 508 compliance, so it's going to take us a little bit of time to get them up on the but bear with us and they'll be there eventually for a reference for you. And if there aren't any questions, I'll stop recording in about 30 seconds. Okay, well, I think I'm going to wrap it up and stop recording. Oh, wait a second. Oh, we've got a couple of thank yous. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully you all found the information useful. We know it's quite a bit of information to digest.
All right, have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.